Hi, Misha here, and it is raining and storming outside like you wouldn't believe. J-Ro and I got soaked to the bone just getting in from the parking lot. So it's a table talk. I actually was going to do some of this video outside, but that's not going to happen. Anyway, let's talk about ARs today. We talk a lot about AKs, and I don't pick up a lot of ARs. But last year, I did grab this gun, the LMT R20 Estonian Reference Rifle 223. This is LMT's official version that they claim is as close to what they ship to Estonia as possible. And I've really enjoyed this gun. So when this gun became available in the store through a trade, it seemed like a good idea. Marked sharpshooter, this is actually LMT's reference rifle for the British, for the UK's L129A1 sharpshooter or sniper support. He does both weapon. And it is, of course, chambered for 7.62 NATO 308. And believe it or not, actually the person this came from couldn't believe it, I don't own what people call an AR10 or any of its variants. At least not a modern one. Nothing that takes standard SR20 mags. So this seemed like a good fit. Certainly to do a couple of videos on. Today we'll look at the features, do some history, some comparison, and as usual, part 2, we'll take it to the range and we'll let Fox see how it does. But this just seemed like, especially considering how happy I've been with this reference rifle, why not this one? And this has been in British service for over a decade and was originally developed to fulfill an urgent requirement for use in Afghanistan because they really didn't have anything except a bolt-action gun or a light machine gun in 223 that really wasn't up to the task. So let's dive in. First, talking about what it ships with in the box. What is the reference rifle? First shots out of the Estonian. This is built on LMT's LM308 WMS lower multi-caliber marked. The export version was initially the LM7. Of course, the upper is the monolithic style with swappable barrel components. 16-inch barrel, direct impingement carbine length low profile gas block system. Furniture, we have a SOP mod stock, ergonomic rubber-coated pistol grip with small storage compartment, and as they're fond of pointing out, it comes with 3 rail panels to cover the Picatinny rail. Unlike the Estonian that has a M-lock, this has pick rail. And I find that funny because they advertise coming with these panels, and nowhere on their website does it say it comes with the barrel tool. So you've got a, $80 tool here, made of all metal, that they don't even mention it comes with, yet they talk about $10 plastic panels. I find that funny. It comes with LMT folding backup sights, relatively low profile. Comes with a standard 2-point sling with QD swivels, and 1 mag pull P-mag. This will also accept metal magazines meant for the same type. And there's a lot more to talk about as far as the features, but that's just the general aspect. And yeah, we have a few kind of tan components with other stuff left in the black. And according to LMT, this is as close as you can get, aside from some marking differences, to what they ship to the UK. It even is worth pointing out that the UK's L129A1 is only safe semi, not safe semi-select burst or full. Just thought I'd point that out. Other variants that LMT exports of this gun, not the A1 type, but others, can have the select fire system. But, yeah, interesting gun. The only other kind of modern 308 we've looked at in recent times is the Swiss SIG SG751. This gun is a little cheaper. And we've also looked at the SCAR that we had on loan, the 17 version. I'm not really interested in the 20 myself. And we've even checked out the M77 PS, which yes, we do need to do a 6-month follow-up on that. Trust me, it's on the docket. But again, like days like today, it comes a rain. So yeah, what is this? I thought this would be a fun video to do because there's nothing out there really on the reference rifle except for a few websites trying to sell these. And just, in case YouTube's wondering, no, this isn't for sale. That's not the point. This is, to talk about something that's often not talked about. And if you would like to help support, go over and check out the link to Patreon. But if you can't do that, totally understand. Liking, sharing, subscribing. I mean, you're on YouTube, you know the deal. And we're in no hurry because, again, it's nasty outside. But let's talk about the 1950s and give some context to why the L129A1 is the way it is and why it's actually an important development in the 21st century. Armalite AR10 first shots. Held open.
I was getting pelted in the knuckle the entire time. No matter where I moved.
You said knuckle,
Knuckle.
Right?
Yes, I said knuckle.
Okay, just making sure.
And nipple.
Today, we kind of refer to 7.62 NATO 308 AR types generically as AR10s. This is, in spirit true, but in actuality, not. They're basically enlarged AR-15s. This is a true original AR-10. Now both are direct impingement or internal piston if you prefer gas systems. Both have multi-lug rotating bolts. Both have recoil systems in the stock area. Of course, both fire 7.62 by 51, and both do feed from 20-round magazines, but different types of mags. And in fact, pretty much different type of everything else. The original AR-10 is an effectively dead design. It died a long, long time ago and then was revived in the 1990s by the Eagle Arms branded AR Armalite company, which reemerged. Now, we will look inside and do some comparisons, but first let's kind of set the scene. Who was buying what was going on at the time. My AR-10 here is a Portuguese contract, parts built in the Netherlands, on a US semi-automatic only, zero-match lower, because the originals were select fire, of course. And the kits did come into America in the 70s and 80s when they were declared surplus. But fewer than 10,000 Armalite AR-10s are ever made. Going back to 1954, a new company, Armalite, was established under Fairchild, the aircraft company. Being led by George Sullivan, it would hire Melvin Johnson of the 1941 Johnson fame, and then a year or two later, Eugene Stoner. And in 1956, the first prototypes of the AR-10 would emerge. This was right when .30 light rifle was turning into 7.62 NATO. and trials were held, and this is when the famous barrel burst happened with one of those. That's because George Sullivan, much to Stoner's objections, went to a composite barrel with a synthetic, well, not synthetic, but a lightweight outer rim and a steel inner lining that no one thought was a good idea, except George Sullivan, because they were trying to go light. Remember, Fairchild was an aircraft company, so lightweight polymers, aluminum alloys, and the like, new metals, that was the name of the game for them, and it was carried over to firearms manufacturing. These were radically advanced guns at the time. There were lots of new guns being developed to fire the new cartridge, but this was one of the smallest and lightest available. Unfortunately, it was too small and light. Now, they would rework it, but it was never a serious competitor in America. But they turned to overseas customers. Nicaragua almost bought some, but again, they failed in trials. Cuba acquired some under Batista, but then Fidel Castro came to power, and Fidel, too, liked them, even offering to buy more from Samuel Cummings, who was Armalite's representative, but politically, they couldn't do it because of the situation America had basically sponsored to the dictator Batista, so since Fidel overthrew him, this is how Fidel became communist, yada yada, doesn't matter. So they had a lot of misadventures, sometimes early on the gun's fault, but by 1958 they were kind of working out the kinks. They also, upon suggestion from some of the military, made a little-known version for a smaller caliber, developed from .222 Remington, known as .223, which, yes, evolved into the AR-15 in 1959 and thus was sold off to Colt. By the way, Eugene Stoner would leave the company about a year later, and even Fairchild would get rid of Armalite around 1960. As far as the AR-10, though, since Armalite itself was an idea company in California, only had about a dozen employees, they really couldn't manufacture more than just prototypes and test models. So they contracted with a Dutch company, AI, to build for them. And one of the earlier contracts was to Sudan. This is also one of the first to have a bayonet lug. But then Portugal was interested in 1960 when the so-called NATO version here was released. And this had a lot of revisions. Had a new gas system for rifle grenades, updated bayonet mount, an enclosed flash hider instead of prong style, updated handguards, new charging handle that could also act as a forward assist, and it was overall just a beefier, stronger design. Still very light, but beefy. Alloy upper and lower, and we had a nearly 20-inch barrel. You also could have a clip-on bipod. And it fed from a 20-round mag. And these were intended to be used as infantry rifles, not sniper guns, anything like that. So Portugal intended to purchase several thousand, but unfortunately they only acquired 4, maybe 5,000. Sudan would get around 2,500. And believe it or not, that was the bulk of production. Fewer than 10,000 were ever made, most going there. Politics kind of played a role. The Dutch government restricted sales to Portugal soon thereafter. So instead of this being adopted by the entire Portuguese military as the M961, since they just had a few, they ended up going to Portuguese paratroopers only. And they were seeing combat until about 1975, 1980, but then lack of spare parts and replacements. Yeah, in fact, AI would soon shut down firearms production around 1962-63. By this time, Fairchild had sold off Armalite. Now, they would go on to do the AR-18, but even that was of limited success. So, yeah, the original AR-10 showed the way, but its biggest contribution was inspiring the AR-15, frankly. But it was left as a curiosity, and it was kind of shelved for many decades until Armalite, the new name kind of emerged from Eagle in the 90s, and they brought it back. But by that point, the design was quite different. So that's what didn't work. What did work? Well, it's applicable to the L129A1, so let's bring it out. The right arm of the free world became the FN-FAL, or in this case for Britain, the L1A1 SLR. It was really the most popular. Yes, America and a couple of other nations did the M14. Italy did the excellent BM59, and latest to the party would have been the updated SETME as the G3, which was the nearest competitor to the FAL, and it had a lot of market penetration, but the FAL was the common thing. And the British version here, well, it came out in 1954 when the Allied Rifle Steering Committee met and looked at some advanced prototypes, pre-production models from FN, and made some suggestions for product improvements. And the thing about FN, they would make the FAL however you wanted. And they were happy to give free production to the Allies that helped liberate them from for the Germans, including the UK. So they adopted their variant, the L1A1, the SLR, in 1957. And it had most of the updates and improvements suggested. Now, Canada was the first with their C1 and later C1A1, but this would soon follow. Now, originally it had a 5-slot flash hider. It went to 3 later on, 21-inch barrel, highly adjustable gas system, short-stroke piston, tilting, tipping bolt, folding charging handle. No automatic last round hold open, but it did have a manual. And originally we had wood furniture. Later on, this Miranil kind of nylon fiberglass stuff would come in, which is surprisingly very durable. We even had a folding rear sight for use with the Suit 4-power optic, which is a top cover mounted system. We got a carry handle and the SLR part of the name. A lot of FALs were select fire, safe, semi-full, but not all. The British version here was just safe and semi. Now, some nations adopted, like Australia, the L2A1, which also had select fire and a heavier barrel on a bipod, but not Britain. For their light machine gun, they actually used the L4A1, which was a Bren derivative in 7.62. So the British gun was safe semi only, and these were built by, of course, the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield, also by BSA. This one's a BSA, and Fazakerly also bought some. And production would run throughout the 1960s, and this was the standard gun for the British and was famously used in the Falklands. The Australian version, also known as the L1A1, was very similar, and the Canadian C1 was similar, but a little bit different, and it was fed by stripper clips. Anyway, this is the 7.62 gun that Britain used from the very late 50s all the way until 1985, when it started to be replaced by the L85A1 from Enfield, the bullpup, in 5.56. But since that bullpup had so many issues, to put it kindly, it took about a decade to fully switch over, and so these were still in service by the time of the first Gulf War. And many in Britain were never satisfied with the L85. Kind of ironically, it was HK who stepped in the 90s to develop the L85A2 that did fix most of the gun's issues. Of course, at that time, HK, a German company, was nominally owned by British Aerospace, who jumped in to bail them out after financial troubles, after the end of the Cold War. So a lot of back and forth there. And the L1 was missed. Unfortunately, they couldn't make more L1s or L85s because the Enfield factory and BSA, basically all of Britain's gun makers, shut down throughout the 80s and 90s, including Sterling, who made the AR10, the Armalite 223, as seen in Terminator. So Britain had no way to make new guns, which meant when the War on Terror began in late 2001, Afghanistan, and then in March of 2003 in Iraq, they were having to make do with some older guns, including a lot of the L85s that were slowly but surely being whittled away at. They also had a light machine gun, a support weapon version known as the L86 that had a 24-inch barrel, but it kind of sucked as a light machine gun because, well, it was a L85 base gun bullpup in the beginning, and it was firing 223 5.56. And I am mentioning that because it is actually valid. So, there we go. And I'm mentioning the L1A1 because this directly would influence the LMT that was first put into service in 2010. So let's get back to our modern gun. This would be a great place and time to put a L85 on the table, but we really don't have anything even close to it in America. Oh well. That was the standard service weapon. At least the A2 is available by the time of Afghanistan and Iraq for Britain. And again, they had the L86. And it's actually the L86 with its 24-inch barrel that they ended up using in a role as a substitute, kind of makeshift, ad hoc standard. They found that in Afghanistan, while some fighting was close quarters, there was a significant small fraction that was long range, and there were several adversaries armed with heavy caliber guns, even if they were sometimes old-fashioned Mosins. So what they did, the L86 at least had a little more get out and touch and some magnification, so it was better than nothing, but it was of course firing 5.56, a 62 grain projectile. So if it got out there, what could it do? But that's all the Brits really had from 2001 through 2008. Now, of course, there were true snipers in the British military. They had the Accuracy International L96. Problem was it was a bolt action. So great as a dedicated sniper gun, but not useful at all in any kind of combat. And follow-up shots were, by necessity, slow. What they needed was a DMR, or what they called a sharpshooter gun. They also saw the need for potentially a closer range CQB type, but still firing a heavier caliber round, and like the British 7.62 L2A2 for penetrating body armor or other protection. So there's a need, and by 2009, the Ministry of Defense issued an urgent operational requirement for immediate delivery of a weapon to fulfill the sharpshooter role, and that's where this comes in. And it's a little surprising that LMT won the contract, because the big names put in their bids. And what the British wanted, it needed to be chambered for 7.62 by 51 NATO. Of course, they would fire the 155 grain sniper ammo, but they also wanted to be able to just fire bog standard ball ammo, even ammo from machine gun belts. So it needed to be able to just handle pretty much any kind of compatible cartridge. They also wanted it to be semi-automatic. It needed to be easy to maintain, easy to train, easy to clean. And one thing that kind of cracks me up, it needed to be a significant and noteworthy improvement over the L1A1. Part of it was they didn't want to buy the same rifle twice. Part of it was I think they saw America pulling out M14s and trying to make them work in the 21st century, and they didn't want any of that. So they said, look, it's got to be better than the L1A1 just all around. Show that it's a more modern gun. And several other things. It needed to be able to reach out to at least 800 meters. Some sources say 1,000, but also capable of close-in fighting at 300 to 500 meters or even less. So that kind of gives you the lay of the land. Entries included the usual suspects. You had HK with the 417. FN put in the SCAR 17. This is about the time it was coming around. The SCAR Heavy. Knights Armament submitted their SR-25. Sabre Defense, which would go defunct not long after, put in the XR10. And LMT put in a rifle, the LM308 MWS, which was actually still under development. It was a recent project with Carl Lewis and was actually derived from the Knights Armament SR25. In fact, I believe they had a license for it, or contract. They must have done, because early guns actually had Knights Armament parts. And these would feed from the same SR25 type mags, originally metal. Later, of course, the mag pulls would come out. And yeah, so those all do. You don't hear much about Saber or the Knights. I suspect the Knights was kind of kicked out because of cost. These weren't going to be sniper guns. They were to be, DMRs, and they were hoping to issue one for every 8 soldiers. So basically one per squad, one per section unit there. So yeah, I would imagine that the SR-25 was just too expensive. The other thing that they were considering was the company has to be able to produce it. It's got to have a large enough factory to be able to supply, so that might have ruled out Saber. But it really quickly came down to the FN SCAR, the HK 417, and this gun here. The LMT, the export model known as the LM7, again domestically the LM308, was supported in the UK by LEI, which is basically Law Enforcement International, a UK company. Much like how when guns come here, American companies usually partner with. Same thing there. So those are the two companies working together to do it. And it kind of was picked because of a Goldilocks situation. The SCAR M17 was felt to be too light and follow-up shots too slow. After all, they were not wanting a bolt action or something like it. Quick follow-up shots were important. The HK 417, on the other hand, was a little too heavy, and I would imagine it too was a little on the spendy side, and I don't know if this mattered, but it also takes its own proprietary magazines, so that might have been a consideration. And it's even heavier than this gun because of its short-stroke gas piston system. So in the end, they picked the LMT for being in between. It's heavier than the SCAR, lighter than the HK. Follow-up shots are adequate. And of course, you have the quick change interchangeable barrel system. LMT ended up offering a 13.5-inch barrel, a 16, an 18, and a 20-inch for this, and it was the 16 that the British ultimately would go with, giving it a very respectable overall length and weight. This thing unloaded is a little under 10 pounds, between which configuration, about 9 3/4 up to nearly 10, just kind of depending on the variant, because the early ones were a little different than the later ones. So the competition started in October of 2009, and by December, the LMT was announced as the winner, and it would be soon classified as the L129A1. It would also have an LEI import mark for the UK. Just thought I'd point that out. And immediately, they ordered 440 for immediate deployment. And these would enter into the field in Afghanistan by April of 2010. And even though this is pretty different from your standard AR, luckily the controls are very similar. And the Brits, especially Special Forces, had been using Canadian-produced C7 and C8s. So at least some in the British military were familiar with that system, even though the standard soldier had L85s. But again, the UK could not produce its own guns, so whatever it was going to do, it would have to not only take a foreign design, but also foreign production, which I'm sure they were just super thrilled about. So let's take a closer look at the features. We have a Surefire 3-prong flash hider. This was actually selected for suppression of the muzzle flash, not necessarily used with a sound suppressor. And I don't know if these really ever were. Certainly early on they were not. The barrel has a 1 11 1/4 twist rate. Early ones could be chrome lined. Later we have a stainless steel, relatively heavy profile. We have the kind of FDE furniture, rail panels and such. Otherwise we're pretty black. This is a true monolithic upper. It's repeated that the early ones were billet. Later they would go to and aluminum alloy forging for the whole thing. Again, they were still kind of developing the LM308 MWS when this was picked anyway, so it's no surprise that there'd be some running changes. These would originally come with Knight's Armament folding adjustable backup sights, but in more recent years, LMT's sights are used. Makes perfect sense why. The top rail is over 19 inches long, and the side rails are over 9 inches long, and our shortest rails on the bottom, because of the barrel system here, it's about 7 inches. And again, we have 2 screws holding the barrel in, and they actually tension down on the barrel. And this is supplied with the tool to remove the barrel, which is nice to have. And it is multi-caliber marked. It is direct impingement, not a gas piston. Standard port door. We have a brass deflector, but notice no forward assist. We have a right side selector and a right and left side mag catch. Standard SR25 mag well, but they use the 20 round mag. Like I said, the ergonomic LMT branded grip, standard folding trigger guard. This is a 2-stage trigger that's said to have a 4-pound pull weight. And we have an adjustable sliding stock with a total of 7 positions on a film-coated tube, and this is a standard diameter tube. It actually steps down, so you can put whatever you want on it. It's not proprietary like on the HK. And finally, we have a QD sling swivel here, or a socket for it on the end plate. We also have additional ones up here. There's quite a few QD sockets on this gun. And flipping it over, you can see the other controls here, including the other mag release. Here's our bolt release, other safety. We do have an extended, enhanced LMT brand charging handle latch. These do help with suppressors, but really it's just to make it easier to grab, frankly. And that's kind of the rundown. I did notice one thing that's a little interesting. Bringing the Estonian reference out again, you'll notice there is a bolt release on the right side. That's not here on the sharpshooter. Just thought I'd point that out because it is a little interesting to my mind. Like I said again, this has an M-lock handguard. Of course, this is, they were different systems, but you can definitely tell that they come from the same company. And I'm actually quite interested to see how this one shoots based on how much I do enjoy this one. Of course, again, this is a short stroke gas piston and all that good stuff. So, I have this one actually set up with its appropriate mounts and, optic and magnifier. And this is just the bare bones gun as it ships, including with the sling. So let's kind of kit it up, talk about what the British military uses it for, and the 2 major configurations in service. The L129A1 is standard issued with the Harris 6 to 9 inch bipod on an arms mount. That's not exactly what I have, but here's a facsimile. Good enough for what's around. At least it is a 6 to 9 inch, and it's on a mount. So that's one of the issue pieces of kit. Also, it does have the sling, as we've already talked about. Standard issue is with 8 20-round mags, a cleaning kit manufactured by Otis, and a Pelican carrying case. But, of course, since this is a sharpshooter gun, or a sniper support gun, we're going to need some glass on top. I don't, but you probably would, and the British certainly do, because while these are actually high-quality iron sights, they're not going to give you a whole lot of use outside a few hundred meters at most. Okay, so in the sharpshooter roll, the standard issue is a Trichicon ACOG 6 power. I think it's a TA648 308, and I'm not going to get one of those. I think even if I could see to shoot, I wouldn't spend that money, and you would also need to get a Trijicon RMR to put on top for close quarters use. Cool as hell if you're in the military and get given those units, or if you're a competition shooter, but not really practical for a civilian, because that costs as much as the gun, and absolutely absurd for someone who can't even see to shoot it with one, so that's not happening. Sorry, guys. Now, in the sniper support role, it actually is fitted with a Schmidt and Bender optic. Can't remember exactly the magnification, but it's quite a powerful one. Wanted to say up to 10, or maybe it's 15. Anyway, you can look it up. But either way, Schmidt and Bender scope for that. No, I don't have one of those either. So, not going to be able to put the correct optic on for you. Although, if someone wants to send me a 6-power ACOG, I will graciously accept it. Here's the best thing I could come up with in my kind of part spin. So, given what was available to me, I just went with a Vern mount and a Vortex. It maybe looks a bit like a Schmidt and Bender if you squint a bit. Anyway, it needed to have some kind of magnified optic on it. So this will do. For now anyway, not adding a ton of weight. Seems appropriate enough. In general, this is the silhouette, the profile of what the British would be using. Optic, bipod, and then the rail covers, the SOP mod stock, the ergo grip, and then a lot of 20-round mags. Like I said, I don't believe that sound suppressors are being issued with these, at least not en masse. I do know that the Surefire was not originally selected specifically to use a suppressor. It's just more of a compatibility, and they liked it, so that's what they went with. And yeah, this was one of the earlier LMT guns. In fact, this was kind of the gun that put LMT on the map as far as military sales. And there would be changes. I know that by 2012, the design would have a few updates and improvements, and also more parts made in-house. It would also lead to New Zealand adopting a variant of the LM308 MWS. And theirs was quite similar, except it actually had full auto capability. And it was mounted with a Leupold 4.5 to 14 power adjustable scope. And it had a different style of sight, and it had a folding foregrip instead of a bipod as standard. So the New Zealand version exists. And I believe that was adopted around 2011, 2012. Could be wrong. It said that obviously the first 440 were delivered and the subsequent orders would go out. It's also said that these were well received by the British troops who were issued them, and the orders continued. The best number I could find was that by the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, around 3,000 had been delivered to the UK, with plans possibly to purchase more. That's a pretty good sized number, considering that they only have roughly, well, probably fewer than 100,000. Several years ago, they only had about 100,000 L85A2s left. I'm sure after Afghanistan and attrition, that's down into 5 digits easily. Again, they have no way to replace losses. So, yeah. But speaking of changes and speaking of features, now we have to kind of crack it open and look inside. And while we do that, let's also compare to the Portuguese contract AR10 we saw at the beginning of the video, so you really get an idea of how this AR10, the modern one based on the Knight's SR25, is different and maybe even similar in some areas to the original Stoner and Sullivan designed AR10, first featured in 1956. Then we'll come back here, I'll give some final thoughts, and wrap it up. Open. Since I needed to remove the mags before we look inside, let's compare real quick. The original. These aren't steel. They're actually aluminium alloy because, again, lightweight. Dimensionally, the mag pull is longer, although front to back, pretty similar. But you'll notice the mag catch spot is very different. Kind of a two-holer there, single here. Yeah, just in no way interchangeable. And Brownells did make some reproduction waffle pattern, but to the newer SR25 style, so that's pretty cool. As far as the guns, they're both takedown pins, two pivots. One fun thing, you'll notice these are dimpled pins. The early Colt AR-15s, SP1s, M16s were dimpled too, but they deleted that pretty early on, around 1965, 64. They have a machining step. But it actually returns with a lot of newer guns like the LMT, because you can actually use that dimple as a spot to put your bullet tip, or some other tool to push it out if you can't push it out by hand. Now, the LMT is a captive pin, and the AR10, much like the original AR-15, the 601, 602, the front pin is not captive. It's actually held in with a spring-loaded detent like a ball bearing. So that's one improvement. That's actually when they started making the front pins on the AR-15 captive. That's where the quote-unquote partial fence comes from. So I do kind of find it funny that they returned to the dimpling now, but for many years it was gone. Otherwise, the selectors are generally in the same positions. Although early AR-10s actually had this as safe and horizontal as fire instead of vice versa. We have a bolt release here, actually a very big ping pong. This here, of course, and that's just, basic comparison. And of course the LMT looks pretty different from a lot of other AR-10 types. So let's dive inside and keep on comparing. So you push the pin and the hinge open in much the same way. But how you get the bolt out is actually a little different because of the rather unique charging system on the original AR-10. Of course, this is just a standard one here. So the main things we need to compare are the lower internals, the fire control group, the bolt, and the buffer. So because we're on YouTube, also because it's just me here and I have a limited size table, I'll have to do this in steps. Sorry, it's not a deal, I know, but we can still compare. And move the LMT away just for a second. The bolt comes out in the way of any modern AR type. Pull your handle back a bit, slide it out. The old school AR-10, because the handle's way up here and nothing's back here, it's actually a lot easier. You just pull it out. Here are our bolts. AR-10 here. This is an early style gas key, fully round, uncut bottom. This kind of cut back bottom is correct for the LMT, even the original L129A1. And notice it has a closed top. This is more standard. We have gas relief holes here. We have an early style, I like to think of it as like a nail head retaining pin before the cotter pin came along. It's a machined pin. We have a floating firing pin. Staked. And the LMT is definitely a new generation here. We have a takedown pin that actually looks similar, but it is captive, which is pretty cool. And so you can't lose it in the field. Now when you take it out, because this firing pin actually has a small spring in it, it will want to spring out, whereas this AR10 is much like a regular AR15. This wants to spring out, so when you put it back in, press in on your firing pin head there, or you may not quite get it. Pretty standard ejector and extractor here. You can see it's just a bigger, beefier bolt. This one's interesting because it actually has double ejectors. Now, from what I understand, the original LM308s and the first delivery batch of 129s, because they were pretty much just shipping Britain whatever they had, because again, it was an immediate request, still just had one ejector. If I'm wrong, correct me, but I believe so. So later ones eject with a good amount of authority. Early carriers like this were old school chromed. The LMTs were initially chromed, but I believe now it's more of a nickel-y finish. Still a very shiny finish, but I believe it's more of a nickel. But I could be wrong on that. But I do know the finish has changed a few times throughout LMT's production run. Let's line them up here. So you can see dimensionally, the LMT, well, I guess that's sticking out. They're about the same length, but a little bit different. The bolt heads, lugs, a little bit different dimensions. It's one of those things where it's close, but ever so slightly different. I would say the enclosed top is the really big one. Plus, of course, they're meant to work with different charging handles. Let's look at their buffers. Alright, original Armalite AR10 on top, LMT on bottom. First off, what a spring on this LMT. That is a monstrous long spring, but that's good. And we have, should be an H3 buffer. So it has tungsten in it, relatively small. Then we look at this guy. By the way, look that the diameter on the original is much more. That's because, again, this is meant to work in a standard buffer tube. Here, this comes off. This is extremely light in the hand. If anyone's ever seen an Edgewater buffer, you get the idea. Comes off here. This is very lightweight alloy. We get a agitating head here. That's why I like doing things with two hands. That's what she said. But as you see, it's got spacers here. Because the idea was for it to move around, and that would compensate for our recoil. The initial AR-15s were the same way. But of course, the Edgewater was phased out. When they went to do it, they found it gave way too high rate of fire. But since the AR-10 came first, it retains it. Yeah, much lighter buffer system, very different principle than the modern style. Here you can tell that this is inspired by the Car 15 specifically. And now we come to one of the areas that are very different, the internals of the lower receiver. Beginning with the LMT, I will say that even though the upper to lower fit together very tightly with basically no play, I was able to push not only the rear but also the front pin with my finger. Pretty standard internals. We do have quite that nice two-stage trigger. pull it here without letting it go. I'd never like to just pull triggers when a receiver's open. Interesting that these don't have the safety option where you can move it when the hammer is uncocked. You know, a lot of newer ones do, but I guess the Brits didn't need it. To me, one reason I do kind of like systems that don't have that feature is it's a good way to know if you have a cocked hammer or not. If you can't move the safety, chances are your hammer is not charged. Pretty neat system, but you know how these look. Gets a little more interesting up here though. The front pin in mine's a little fidgety to get back in sometimes. I'm not going to take it out. Like I said, it's a non-captive pin, but you can look in here. This is a very different group. Oops. Yeah, a very different hammer system. I'm going to switch it down for a sec. Again, not wanting to pull it. Especially the hammer spring and all that. Check it out. You know, it's a whole different idea there for the trigger group on the AR10. I find things like that interesting. Of course, this has a standard barrel and extension that goes in, whereas the LMT has the special one that's removable. So they are pretty different. And again, this is a semi-automatic only lower, so you gotta keep that in mind. But it is well matched to this upper. These kits were available in America for a minute, but have been long since gone. Again, both are direct impingement or internal piston if you prefer that. So that system's the same. The AR10 started off with non-chromed bores and barrels, and the later ones sometimes had chromed chambers. But I don't think they ever did fully chrome bores, but I could be wrong on that. The LMTs, of course, are either chromed or stainless, and they do MP test, magnetic particle test, both the bolt and the barrel at LMT. But yeah, it's those mechanical differences that I really like, and I think the fact that the 129 is mechanically different from most other AR10 types, Armalite or Knights or whatever, is kind of actually what attracts me to it. It's still very clearly an AR design, but it's also kind of doing its own thing, and I really like that. And as you've seen throughout this video, we have fired this gun, but that was just to kind of test it. These guns, especially this polymer Bakelite, they're not getting any younger, so you definitely don't have these as shooters. So that is one reason I was kind of excited to get this. Maybe have a shooter grade AR10. What do you think? Hopefully I was able to get at least some of the internals in frame for you. If not, I do apologize.
You're good.
Ready?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hits my Nipsey.
And here we are with both back together. It's kind of funny that really length and size-wise, they're not a lot different. Even though this is a shorter barrel and does have an adjustable stock, it's just a much beefier gun. Of course, this is meant to be a DMR, whereas these were originally intended to be lightweight, compact battle rifles. Shame that magazines don't interchange. Now, Brownells made a really nice version, the BRN 10A and B. We did videos on both of those years ago, and they do take the modern mag, although they prefer the metal. And they did a great job of copying as far as it goes, while still keeping it kind of parts compatible with the modern design. But I hope that kind of shows you how they are similar and different. And not to say one's better than the other. Obviously, the originals are just not common and really not a huge note in history. But it's nice that it came back around and that years, decades afterwards, it found its purpose. Of course, in America, the Knight's gun would become the M110, and other nations have adopted it. The HK417 has seen adoption in various guises, and of course, M14s really work too. So we are seeing kind of a return to this, and also kind of that concept of, well, not a full sniper gun, and a gun that can be used in a close quarters secondary role, or suppressed, or change out the barrel. I mean, because if you wanted with these, you could just pull the barrel off, put the 13.5 on, and then put a suppressor, and it wouldn't be egregiously huge. But, yeah. So what do you think? And how do you think of LMT's improvements over the years? I wish I had an early LMT or a Knight's SR25 to kind of compare this with, but guys, I just don't have that. In fact, the guy that this came from on a trade was shocked that I didn't actually own a gun that took SR25 mags. I've had them in the store, like the Glow Ace. It's just, I don't know. I collect military guns, and I just haven't had the desire. Most of my 308s, 7.62 NATOs are old-fashioned, old-timey battle guns, like this one here. Well, let's have some final thoughts and wrap it up. So what do I think, personally? Again, not having fired it yet, because today we kind of got rained out. People talk about how heavy these are. Maybe I'm just too used to handling old-timey guns. I mean, even that AR10 was about 7.5 pounds. So this isn't a whole lot more, about 2 pounds more. But you get a lot more for it, mostly the big barrel and the monolithic rail. I've always been a fan of the SOP mod stock. You see it on some of my other ARs. And I really like this tube. It's easy to move. Well, but you see how tight it is. Like, you have to press it. So since it is a relatively large caliber gun, it's nice that it doesn't wiggle around. It does have storage compartments for batteries. That's nice. QD sling pockets are always a good thing. Rubber butt pad. I've always kind of liked these ergo grips that LMT does. It's also nice that there's a storage compartment in there for small tools and whatnot. It does require a screwdriver to get to those little screws. I kind of wish it was, but then again, it's very secure. The trigger is nice. I really do like it. It's very still clearly a military, but not bad. The upper to lower fit is fantastic. No wiggle wobble, but I can still push the pins by hand. It's great that it takes a standard magazine. And it's nice that Magpul is the standard, because you can still acquire these very affordably. And if you want, you can even use a 25 rounder. But I'll stick to 20, thanks. The monolithic upper, if you're going to do a rail, this is the way to go. Over 19 inches, you've got plenty of rail space. And if you look at pictures, the Brits do have versions of this with night vision mounted. It's pretty much the entire rail. It's ridiculously big. How do I know that? Because a friend described it to me. And I do like these covers. They're comfortable. Still gives you a little more rail space out here. The bipod I put on is a knockoff. It's not a true Harris, but it was available, and it is at least the right length. I've always been a fan of these Surefires. The ringing bugs some people. But as I've said, I grew up in a time where there were a bunch of knockoff cast devices, and they don't ring. They kind of make a thud noise. I was taught by a mechanical engineer to kind of test real quick if something's forged or machined metal based on its ringing. Again, you're blowing a big explosion around. Who cares about a little extra? I don't know. Sometimes I just think people kind of whinge on just to do it. I don't know. Snowflake. And I'm blind, and hearing's really important to me. It doesn't bug me at all. Never has. The sights are nice, very low profile, metal, adjustable. It's nice that they're included. This package LMT claims is as close as you can get to what they ship to the UK, so I have no reason to doubt these aren't the same features. It would be nice if it were marked L129A1, but I don't know if that marking is done in the US by LMT, or if it's actually added in the UK by LEI when they put their import mark on. If anyone knows, please let me know. I would assume it's added here, but I could be wrong. If it's not in this gun, it might be a legal thing where they just simply can't do it for contract reasons, but I'm not sure. But that's the only thing I might point out on this. But yeah, you got all the modern bolt updates, buffer updates, a nice barrel that should last a very long time. And I am excited to have a modern 7.62 NATO gun and one that fits my collection. Again, we have never had and probably never will get British L85 A1s, A2s. The closest we'll ever get are probably those Sterling AR10s. But at least this is something that fits Britain's role. And, you know, 1 per every 8 infantry soldiers, that's not an uncommon thing in service. So I'm pretty excited about it. And I'm also excited to see how Fox receives it. J-Bro too, if he can join us. It's just hard to get all three of us that have time off at the same time. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do you own one of these? I will say I do like the extended latch, and you know, having an optic, it does make it easier. The bolt throw is very smooth. Everything is very smooth on this. I like the finish. Very much like my Estonian. I don't think if I hadn't already owned the Estonian reference rifle, I would have considered this one so much because they are not cheap. But luckily I did pick it up as a trade, so secondhand, so I got it a little bit cheaper. It did come with the box and everything though. Good deal. So yeah, please comment below if you'd like to. Go over and check out Patreon. Bucking up a month. We're about to do another Q&A here, hopefully at the end of this month. If you can't, we understand. Just liking, sharing, subscribing. That's all gravy too. This is Misha, and also on behalf of Fox, we'll catch you very soon at the range with this gun next time.